Hi guys, how are you all? Today's video is going to be very interesting for you because in today's video you can see what Boston was like in 1920. So if you want to know the details, you have to watch the full video. And if you like such videos, then subscribe to our channel. So let's start. The 1920s, a decade of transformation, ambition, and quiet power. And in the heart of New England, Boston stood as one of America's most fascinating cities, where old traditions met the spark of a modern age. As the film opens, the camera drifts across the Charles River, catching the morning fog rolling over the water. Streetcars hum in the distance, and the city begins to wake. This is Boston in the 1920s, a place still shaped by its colonial past, yet rapidly stepping into a new century. On the streets of downtown Boston, the sound of trolley bells mixes with the footsteps of thousands. Men in flat caps and long coats hurry to work, while women, dressed in the bold fashions of the era, move with a new confidence that the decade itself seemed to demand. The post-war optimism is everywhere. The city feels alive, restless, and full of possibility. In neighborhoods like Beacon Hill and Back Bay, elegant brownstones line the streets just as they do today. But in the 1920s, these neighborhoods were symbols of old Boston wealth. Families whose legacies stretched back generations. Just a few blocks away, the atmosphere shifts toward bustling immigrant communities in the North End and South Boston. Italian bakeries, Irish taverns, and small corner markets fill the air with the smells and sounds of cultures blending, creating the unique character Boston is known for. The decade brought dramatic changes. Prohibition swept across the nation, and Boston was no exception. Officially, alcohol was banned. Unofficially, the city buzzed with hidden bars, whispered passwords, and smoky backroom speakeasies. Behind unmarked doors, jazz bands played late into the night, while patrons sipped drinks poured from bottles that had arrived quietly through the harbor. The police cracked down often, but the nightlife rarely stopped. Meanwhile, the city's industries were evolving. Factories along the waterfront churned with activity. Shipbuilders, machinists, and dock workers powered Boston's economy. But new technologies were arriving fast. Automobiles began to replace horse-drawn carts, and roads widened to keep up with the growing traffic. The skyline, still modest compared to today, slowly climbed higher as new buildings appeared, signaling the start of a vertical future. At Harvard Square, the intellectual heart of the region pulsed with energy. Students debated politics, literature, and science in cafes around Cambridge. The ideas born here would influence the decade and beyond. Across the river, MIT continued to push the boundaries of engineering and innovation, helping shape the technological boom that would eventually define the American century. Yet, the 20s in Boston were not only about progress, they were also years marked by tension. The decade began with the aftermath of the infamous Boston police strike of night, a moment that left the city shaken and divided. Throughout the early 20s, debates over worker rights, wages, and fairness echoed across workplaces. Immigrant communities faced discrimination, and political battles often drew thick lines across the city. But through it all, life in Boston carried on with resilience. Children played stickball on narrow streets. Street vendors called out the day's specials. Crowds packed Fenway Park cheering for the Red Sox under the bright summer sun. Jazz music floated out of hotel lounges, and movie theaters lit up Washington Street as silent films gave way to the early talkies. As the decade drew to a close, Boston stood at a crossroad, proud of its past, yet aware that bigger changes were coming. The Roaring Twenties would soon give way to the challenges of the 1930s, but the spirit of the era left a lasting imprint on the city. It was a time when Boston found a new rhythm, balancing tradition with the modern ambition. Today, when you walk through its historic streets, echoes of the 1920s remain. The old brownstones, the waterfront smell of the harbor, the narrow alleys of the North End, they all carry stories from a century ago. Stories of a city rebuilding, reinventing, and rising into the modern world.